Hey now, Brawlers, it's time for another Board Game Brawl review with Nick Minahan, sponsored by BoardGameBliss.com. Hey now, today we're going to take a look at the Undercity from Privateer Press. This is a tabletop dungeon crawling game that is set in the same universe, the Iron Kingdoms, that War Machine and Hordes, or Warma Hordes, is set in. Which is also the same universe as one of my favorite games, my favorite board-style games from Privateer Press, which is High Command. Now, in Undercity, as the name implies, it takes place in one of the largest cities of this universe, Corvus, and it takes place in the underbelly of that city. Like, there's a whole other city underneath it, which is just where all like the scoundrels and stuff hang out, and just a bunch of dark tunnels where a lot of shady goings-ons happen. That's a phrase, I think. But what you do is you and the other players cooperatively, this is a fully cooperative game, you take control of a bunch of heroes, this ragtag bunch of mercenaries who are going down trying to solve this mystery through different chapters of the storyline, and you're doing it in typical dungeon crawling fashion. There'll be hordes of enemies, you have to meet an objective, you all have special abilities, so on and so forth. Let me go ahead and give you a brief look at how the game is played, then we're going to come back, I'll let you know what I think. Alright, I'm going to give you a very brief run-through of the Undercity. This is a fully cooperative game for up to 4 players. The goal of the game is to take your band of mercenaries through a bunch of chapters in the game and meet the objectives in order to win the chapters successfully. The game comes with a campaign guide that will tell you all about the different chapters and all the different setup. You have little story blurbs that give you the backstory of the characters and what they do in between the missions, and then it will tell you how to set up the individual chapters. Now, there are a lot more components that I'm not showing you here just because there's a ton of stuff in the game and it's kind of beyond the scope of my camera to do it easily. But this is the setup for the first chapter of the game. You have the big game board here that you also put a bunch of other tiles out in order to make the paths of the dungeon. And then you notice there's a bunch of figurines out here. You have all these different well, I'll call them monsters for lack of a better term, but they're the enemies of the game. And notice how they're color-coded as well. That's important once we get through the setup of how the villains spawn and how they interact too. You also have all these different hero figurines. I'm just assuming for this setup that you're using all of them. Like you have the gunner here, Canas, and there's these two are actually together. I'll get to that in a second. But you'll always have a starting point where you're going to put all of your guys, and then the campaign guide will tell you where to set all the other enemies that you have to fight. And actually, in this scenario, the objective is to get to this dead body marker here and investigate it, and then defeat the boss that will appear afterwards. So every campaign is going to have, or every campaign chapter is going to have some sort of different mission you're trying to complete. Couple of other notable things at different spots on the board, just like how there was an exit token over there where the heroes were, you have these different numbered sections, and you might have a lot of these depending on what the scenario is and what it calls for, but these are actually where enemies are going to spawn by rolling a die. So if I roll a 4 through 6, whatever enemy I'm spawning would show up there, for example. You might also have side quest cards that you'll put out, and the chapter will tell you where exactly to put them. They might be random, they might be a certain item, and so on, but you can move there in order to gain that item. Now, obviously, any kind of cooperative game is only as good as its heroes, and there are 4, well, technically 5 heroes in this game. There's a couple of them that I have set up out here. You have Canas, who is a gun mage duelist. First off, every hero is going to have a potion which they can use to resuscitate an incapacitated character, but you only get 1 usage of the potion, barring any special conditions. But it is cool that you have these different potion containers here. You have hit points that are determined by your vitality. So here's all the different stats in the game. You have vitality, strength, intelligence, perception, defense, and armor. Most of the time, the most important ones you're going to be using are vitality, defense, and armor. The others are mostly for strength, or just general ability checks that you might have to make during the course of the game. If you've played D&D, you pretty much know what to expect from things like that. Your vitality will determine how many of these hit point markers that you have. As you take damage, you'll flip these over to determine how close you are to being incapacitated. Other important things, you have initiative up here in the top. You always resolve your player turn order by highest initiative going down unless the chapter specifies otherwise. Then you have your weapons. Now, Canas here has a ranged weapon and a melee weapon. If you look over here at Gardek, I don't know why I was thinking Gorm. he actually has 2 melee weapons indicated by the swords here, his axe and his shield. Now, if you are allowed to take a full attack action, you can actually use every type of weapon that you have. So if you're making a ranged attack, you could use every ranged weapon you have. In the case of Gardeck, since he has an axe and a shield, he could actually attack with both of those, and possibly against separate targets as well. So just that could be very useful in certain situations. Now, you might notice as well that every character has different special abilities on their sheet. Like, Gardeck has great strength, which means at the start of every turn, he can choose a different special ability, like having higher defense, having higher strength. He also has regeneration, which lets him discard his feat cards just to heal some of his damage. Whereas if you look over at Canas, or Canis, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing her name, people who might know her better than me, from the RPG, but she has rune shots. So every time that she makes a ranged attack, she can choose one of the different rune shots to use, which gives her a different special ability. So in this case, it might be she can hit targets that are in the same space with a friendly figure, or she can boost her damage, or she can knock down enemies. If she uses one of her feat cards or discards it, she can actually use a trick shot and hit an additional target. At the bottom of each character card, there's a second wind ability, which is to say if a certain condition is met, you get to cycle through some of your feats. So for hers, if she misses with an aimed attack, she can draw feat cards until she has 3. Now, what are these feat cards I keep talking about? Well, every character has a feat card deck, and they'll always have 3 feat cards that are available randomly. You can use these at any point during your turn. You can use as many as you want, but you only get to draw 1 at the end of your turn. And in fact, you can only have 3 face up at any given time. So if you draw 1 and you still already have 3, you have to get rid of 1. So the game kind of encourages you to use them. Now, when you use one of the feat cards, you choose which of the 2 abilities you want to resolve on the card. And they might be abilities just like giving you extra armor or extra defense, or giving you extra attacks, or re-rolling your dice, or adding bonuses to your dice. Things like that, general abilities. Some of them are a little more specific and powerful, like being able to move faster around the board, or essentially teleporting to spots on the board, things like that. Moving around to show you some of the other components. Every game you're going to have a stash where you're going to store XP. Now, you gain XP just for damaging enemies. Every point of damage that you deal lets you put an XP into the stash, and then in between missions, you're able to spend that XP in order to buy ability cards. Just to show you some of those ability cards, here are the ones for Canas. So you'll have this whole deck that you get to choose from and spend the XP on. You'll share the XP between all the different party members. And if you're not playing in a campaign mode, but you want to try the later missions, you can give yourselves a starting bonus of XP just to start off on a better footing. So choose cards like Lost in the Crowd, where if there's at least 2 other friendly characters in your space, you cannot be targeted by the villain's attack. Precision Barrel, your Mage Lock pistol has an accuracy of 6 instead of the normal 5, and these are permanent, by the way. Heavy Mage Lock, your Mage Lock pistol has a power of 10, which increases your damage, and so on and so forth. And of course, what adventure game is complete without villains? So the chapter will tell you which generic villain groups you're going to use. I use generic as just a loose term here, but for instance, in this starting chapter, you have crossbowmen and you have sword thugs. And on their cards, they'll tell you all their different stats as well, which are very similar to the stats of the heroes, except you have less of them because they're never going to be doing ability checks. So they have their accuracy, which is determining their hit. They have their power to determine their damage. And those numbers on the bottom are, again, for die rolls. So whenever you're spawning creatures, when you roll dice to do that, you're going to see where the numbers that line up to the particular types of enemies, and whatever number it is. Like if I roll a 2, I'm going to put out a crossbow thug. And there's also a difference between the different colors of enemies. There's this thing in this game called color priority for determining which enemies come out, because it'll make more sense in a minute, but when certain villain actions are taken, they only apply to certain color groups, and you have to put out colored enemies in a certain way. It's kind of a weird thing, but it makes sense the more that you play it. Then there are boss monsters. In this particular scenario, you're going to have one boss monster. When it gets to the point where the boss will spawn, you'll randomly determine from the 2 here, like the Epic Ogrun Brute or the Arulic Merc, and then you'll put that out. And just to show you, there are a lot of enemies in this game. Just to show you some of the other... Oh, there's another game over there. Cameo. This is one of the more powerful monsters you'll fight at the end of the game. You might run into sort of renegade warjacks, which are the steam mechs of the War Machine Hordes universe. Lots and lots of different types of monsters and creatures. And notice that some of them, if they're not bosses, also have the same color priority thing, signifying that they might be different colors coming out, and different colors will activate. Here, I think, I haven't gone to all through the chapters yet, but I think this is the big boss of the whole thing. Spoiler alert! Alright, so I'm going to run you through basically what's going to happen on the different turns of the game. Generally, how it's going to work is that you'll have a round of play. A round is going to be signified by drawing an event card and resolving it. And then starting with the highest initiative player, each player is going to resolve their turn. But your turn consists of a number of different things. It consists of spawning new enemies. It consists of actually taking your actions for the turn. Then it resolves of actually doing the villain actions. So first, let me show you some more of those loot cards before I forget. The side quest cards, which could consist of loot cards. You have things like encounters, so you might run into packs of different enemies, and they'll have little bits of story blurb and tell you how you have to resolve this. So this one says roll a die, place a red drudge and a blue drudge in the matching passage. These drudges are hostile to all characters. Then you'll have a bounty if you can successfully go through the encounter. Rampaging Jack, like the mini I showed you before. You'll have these different types of events, like you find a safe house or a misplaced message. I don't want to go into too much detail because it does kind of feel like spoilers. But then you can find different items as well, like misfit armor or a pile of coins, which will have you make this is an example of one of the checks. You make a perception check. If you fail, you have to roll a die and you get XP, but if you succeed, you get to roll 2 dice and take that many XP into your stash. And then you'll find items like blade poison that you can use. And then let me show you the events. Like I said, you'll draw 1 at the start of a round, and that will affect the entire round. If you're lucky, it's just ominous silence and nothing happens. But one thing to note on any of these cards are the colors in the backgrounds, like the strips here at the top or the middle and the bottom. That determines color priority. So if there's ever an equal chance of an enemy coming out, and like let's say you have an equal amount of red and blue crossbow thugs, you look at the event card and see what the color priority is. If it's blue, that means that's the color of thug that you put out. But usually you're not going to have ominous silence. You're going to have things like enforcers, where you put 2 sword thugs and a crossbow thug at a random passage. That's why you roll the die. Or fog bank, where all characters get +1 defense against ranged attacks. Or devil rat swarms. Don't you hate it when that happens? Every character in a space with no other figures makes a hazard roll. A hazard roll in this game is simply rolling a die and hoping that you get not a 5 or 6. Otherwise, you're going to take a damage. And then cards like the boss, where if the boss is active, you activate the boss. If he's not in play, you just activate the villain farthest from any hero. Alright, so player turns. First thing you're going to do is spawn. So you're going to take 2 dice. The quickest way to do it, take 2 dice, a black and a white die. Determine, the game just uses D6s. Determine which one you want to count as the type of villain and which one you want to count as the location of the villain. Roll those dice. So let's say that I'd said this was going to be the type of villain I'm putting out, and this is where it's going to spawn. Because that's a 1, and because the numbers over there indicated that was for the crossbow thugs, and because I haven't, I don't have an equal amount of crossbow thugs. I have 1 more red than anything else, so I'm going to off in the stash. So I'm going to take a red, and I'm going to put it on the 5 space. So he's going to go over there. Next, it is your player activation. This is where you get to move and do an action, and then you get to resolve, get a new feat card. And you must do the feat card at the end, but you can do your move or your action in any order that you like. And by the way, before I forget, the other characters that you have access to in this game, because they're very interesting, Pog and Doorstop, they're actually 2 different models that the same player will activate, and they kind of work off of each other. Like Pog is a little goblin guy, and he'll give actions that boost these Warjack, Doorstop, who moves around kind of autonomously but needs Pog for some special abilities. And the way you resolve their turns is really weird. You can resolve them in any order that you like, and you can wait to use Pog's actions for when Doorstop's about to go, but essentially it's one player controlling them both. And then you have Milo Boggs, who's the other ranged character. He's an alchemist who throws things like acid bombs and smoke bombs and so on and so forth. And notice that he has 2 ranged weapons, so he can actually shoot. His full attack is to use both of those weapons, throw a knife and throw a grenade. So, movement on your turn, very simply, every large space, let me focus in a little bit more here, is a space. So you get to move 1 space on your turn unless you choose to do the run action. Or I'm sorry, it's actually called the charge action. And if you do the charge action, you can't make any ranged attacks, but if you make a melee attack, it actually gets boosted. Now, what boosted means is that you get to roll an extra die for whatever's getting boosted. If you're making an attack roll, you get to roll an extra die to see what your accuracy is. If you're making a damage roll, you get to roll an extra die to determine how much power you're going to have to deal wounds. And it doesn't really have any of that out here, but there can be a lot of different terrain features like rough terrain that can hinder your movement, things like that. Now, alternatively, let's say that Canas, let's just kind of move these people around to make it a little more dynamic here. Let's say that Canas had previously moved up to this point, and she wanted to make a ranged attack. Now, her range is 2, so these guys are within range of her, and with her Mage Lock pistol, they're within range of her, and she wants to make sure that she hits, so she can hold and aim. What that means is that she actually gets to boost her accuracy roll in order to hit. But she cannot move if she does that. She's literally standing in place, aiming her gun. And speaking of that, there are 3 actions you can do before or after you move. One of them is to make an attack. One of them is to revive one of your compatriots who has been incapacitated by using one of your potions or some other kind of special ability. And the other is to make a stat check for something. You might have to make some sort of special ability. So, for instance, if you want to investigate the dead body, which is the object of this chapter, you'd have to make a check. But let's say you wanted to make an attack rolls and also damage rolls in this game. Very simply, you're going to roll normally, if you don't have any other kind of bonuses like boosting, you're going to roll 2d6 and you're going to add your accuracy rating, that is for damage. And you're going to add up all those numbers plus any other bonuses that you might have and compare it to the defense rating of the unit that you're trying to hit. If you meet or beat that number, you have hit. Now you have to determine whether or not you actually get to do damage and how much potential damage you're going to deal. For that, you're going to look at your power rating. And you're going to, again, roll 2d6 plus any boosting dice you might have, plus any kind of static bonuses you might have. And if that number meets or beats the opponent's armor rating, and by the way, this works both ways, same kind of rolls, one of your party members will have to roll the dice for the enemies against you, whatever the attacks are. But if the roll meets or beats the armor rating of the model, then you deal a wound. You flip over one of your wound counters. If you exceed that number by 5, it's a really bad damage roll, and you have to flip over 2 wound markers. And then once you've done your action, then you're going to draw a new feat card. And remember, you can use your feat cards as much as you want during the course of the game. But either way, whether you have an empty spot for one of the face-up ones or you have to discard one, you'll get a new one at the end of your turn. Then the last thing you do on your turn is villain activation. This is where the bad guys finally get to move and do something against you. The way that you're going to do that is with villain action cards. There's going to be a deck of villain action cards, and the chapter will actually tell you, just like with the event cards, how you're going to set them up at the beginning. You're going to draw one and determine what it does. Now, cards like this say activate the villain closest to you, then reshuffle the villain action deck. Boss Blitz, if the boss is active, he will activate, otherwise one of the other villains will. Crossing Swords, activate up to 2 sword thugs. Remote Rumble, activate the villain farthest from you. Then you have color-coded ones, all the red guys or all the blue guys, Crimson Carnage or Azure Assault. Now, there are rules for priority as far as like who the villains are actually going to attack, and those are actually going to be determined at the bottom of their action cards. There are these symbols. There's a symbol system in the game. So, for instance, it's all dependent on how close the applicable targets the enemies are. So, for instance, if the crossbow thug has a guy who's within range at the start of his turn, he'll hold there and aim. Why wouldn't he, right? It makes sense. He'll boost his attack. If there's someone who's just a few spaces away, but he can get into range, he'll move forward and just make a regular shot. Otherwise, he's just going to move as close as he possibly can. And the sword thugs behave mostly the same way. Those guys might actually charge as well in order to get a boosted melee attack. If all else fails and they don't have an applicable target, then you're actually going to look at the bottom of the card, and that will tell you who you should target. So this one says, if all else fails, you target with these enemies the person with the lowest initiative. Or this one for the blue guy says the highest initiative. Or this one says whoever is the active player, they'll try to attack them as much as they can. And once you get done activating the applicable villains or bosses, then, assuming you're all not dead, it goes to the next player's turn in initiative order, and when every player has done the exact same thing, spawn, act, villain action, then you start a new round, flip over a new event, do it all over again until either you're all dead or you have met the chapter objective. In this case, investigating the dead body and killing the boss after the boss spawns, after investigating the body, and so on. But there's a lot more to the game than that because there's a lot of different chapters. That's a quick and dirty run through of Undercity. I think it gave you the gist of what you can expect. Let's get to my final thoughts. All right, there's a lot to unpack here, so let me just say this. I like the Undercity. I think it's a good game. I don't think it's fantastic, and certainly it is difficult for this game to stand out in the crowd of dungeon crawling board games because there are a lot of them right now. But I'll get back to that in a minute. Let's start with theme and components, which is what I always start off talking about. The theme of the game is good. I mean, I like the universe of War Machine and Hordes, and I wanted to know more about it without actually having to sit down to play the role-playing game, or even the miniatures game, which I know I have some of the miniatures up here somewhere, but I'm never actually going to play it. Let's just be real about that. One day I might. But in the meantime, the best way I can do that is by playing board games like High Command and now Undercity, and I appreciate that I get that little flavor of the game. And much like with Privateer Press's other dungeon crawling game, although it's quite a bit different, Level 7 Omega Protocol, you go through chapters in the campaign mode, which give you little bits and blurbs of story, which I do appreciate. It really does go a long way towards bringing the storyline to life. And the different objectives that you have to complete in each of these scenarios are laid out very well in order to flesh out that story in the theme quite a bit more. Artwork and components. I like the artwork on the character cards and the character sheets a lot. I think it's really well done. It really helps bring out the flavor of the characters themselves, and together with all the different special abilities, which I'll get back to in a minute, that also helps bring the theme to life quite a bit. Every character feels very distinct and different from each other, especially the, Doorstop and Gob? Is it Doorstop and Gob? I'm forgetting their names right now. But the Warjack and the Goblin, who are like way different than any of the other characters, almost to a fault. They're kind of clunky to use, but I like that you can play them and have a completely different experience than the other characters are having. I also love the miniatures in this game. I know they're board game quality. A miniatures person or someone who even plays War Machine or Hordes themselves would say that they're inferior quality to those, but to me they look really good, and again, they all look very distinct, and they give good flavor to the game and the characters that you're playing. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, which is the number one thing I've heard talked about with this game, and that is the board itself, all the different tiles, which, yes, even in person, are incredibly bland, boring, and just plain ugly. That is the truth of the matter. Now, look, you're going down through this place called the Undercity, and you can't expect it to look that beautiful and vibrant and intricate and neat-looking. But somehow or another, games like the Dungeons and Dragons adventure games like Castle Ravenloft and Temple of Elemental Evil, all these different things, those primarily take place in underground tiles, and while those don't look that good, even those manage somehow to make the caverns in these dark, dank, gloomy places look decent, good, like kind of bring the theme out. These look like static wallpaper, stone-looking wallpaper, just repeated over and over again, like having a desktop image that's on repeat, like step and repeat. It just looks ugly, and it does detract from the theme just a little bit. It's not a deal breaker for me. I've seen much worse, and again, you're playing with really good quality miniatures. You have great artwork on all the cards and the character sheets, and it is easy to forget about it over time, but it does seem like a pretty bad decision to go with this arrangement. I don't know why. Maybe it's possible. I know that you can use a lot of the miniatures and stuff, components from this game, with the actual Iron Kingdoms RPG. Maybe these were reused tiles from that were just really generic. I don't know, but it was a bad decision. But again, it's not a deal breaker for me. Maybe it is for you, and it seems to be for a lot of people. But I just thought I'd point that out. So going on to the actual gameplay elements. I already mentioned that I love how every character feels distinct, and the game does a lot of really neat things I haven't seen other dungeon crawlers do. And again, there's a lot of dungeon crawling board games out there for you to choose from now, and they all need to be different from each other some way, somehow, in order to stand out. And I think that Undercity does a mostly admirable job with that. I love how the characters' feats work. The rotating bunch of feats that you have coming in and out, which are not always all that powerful, but it does add a variability to the game and a randomness to the game that is not unwelcome. Because it sort of represents the randomness and chaos of battle, and the fact that these are very battle-hardened mercenaries that have a lot of different special abilities. They're not just good at one thing. They've been fighting in battles for years and years and years together, and so they have different abilities that come to mind whenever the situation arises. So I enjoy the thematic element that those rotating feats gives to you, and I love that it encourages you to use at least one of them every single round, because you're going to lose it anyways, so you might as well do it. So it makes you feel more powerful right off the bat, right from the first scenario, than a lot of other games make your characters feel. But you also have a built-in feat. Every character has something like multiple, every character I think has 3 different abilities built into their character sheet, that like the trick shots and stuff that I'm forgetting her name, I'm sorry, Celine or something, whatever, the female character, and the different actions that the goblin can make his warjack do. You have these different variabilities together with the feats, which gives you a lot of different options, but none of them are that drastically different, so it doesn't feel like you're being overwhelmed. I also like the whole aspect of the characters having multiple attacks. If you're able to pull off a bunch of melee attacks, which can be very, very powerful, but sometimes that's not the best option for you to do. Again, this is a dungeon crawling game, so all the typical strategies and tactics you have to worry about in a dungeon crawling game, like how to move up and where to move and putting yourself around tactically with the other players, comes into play. And hand in hand with that, the whole villain phase of the game, that feels a bit clunky to me. The fact that you have to do a lot of upkeep on every single turn was probably one of the things I like the least about the system, because it's like, okay, spawn enemy, take your turn, then do the enemy actions, and then, every round you also have the event as well. That's not a huge deal, but the spawning and the villain actions on every player's turn slows down the game quite a bit. I think I almost would have preferred if everyone went all at once, then you did all but the spawning, and then you did all the actions for the villains, because the other way around, it just interrupts the flow of the game too much. It just feels very disjointed to me, which is a shame, because the other parts of the game work pretty solidly, and I think what they were going for here, if I'm just spitballing and assuming what the designers were going for, was that they wanted to make a dungeon crawler that was more easy and simple to get into. There wasn't like an overwhelming amount of stuff just flooding you with information and symbols and iconography and like walls of text like in Fantasy Flight games, like in Descent. Here it's just very straightforward, although the rulebook is terrible, I will say that. But aside from that, once you figure out the main bullet points and what you need to know to play the game, it is rather simple. I think that's what they were going for. That can be a detriment or it could be a benefit depending on how deep you want your dungeon crawling games to be. And I think ultimately that is the main sticking point with the Undercity, which is that while it is a good, solid game and it has some fun elements to it, there's a lot of options for you right now. You have Descent. I mean, those are games like Descent and the Super Dungeon Explorer require someone to be the bad guy. Well, not the new Super Dungeon Explorer, but Descent, which is the main competitor to a game like this, has you in the role of an overlord. So if you want the full co-op experience, you might go for Undercity. But then again, a lot of the systems in Descent are much more robust, and there's a ton of expansions for that game. I think that's going to be the main thing with Undercity is, what's that first expansion going to be like? Is there going to be an expansion? Level 7 Omega Protocol, which was very similar, actually more similar to Descent than this game is, had no expansions. And I don't think there will ever be expansions. And while there's still a lot of game in that box, it did hurt it. Is Undercity going to be supported? I don't know. I think that's going to ultimately determine whether or not it stays in my collection long term, and whether or not a lot of other people should buy into it, and whether I would recommend the game to a lot of people. If that first expansion adds a bunch of new, more attractive tiles, more enemies, it changes things up a bit, gives you more actions to do, then I might appreciate the game a whole lot more. But for right now, you really have to figure out, do I want a fully cooperative dungeon crawler? And does this one work for me better than, Super Dungeon Explorer, Descent, Super Fantasy, which is also a fully cooperative game, but with a much more sillier tone? And also, do you like War Machine? Those are big things that you're going to have to take into account. But regardless, I will say Undercity, solid, good game. Not necessarily for everyone, but if you want a different dungeon crawling experience and those other games didn't work for you, check this one out. Thanks for watching. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon. And make sure to check out our sponsor, Board Game Bliss, where you can find an amazing selection of games from around the world. BoardGameBliss.com. Thanks for your support.